I have a story that will stick with me forever and badger my curiosity. Back in 2010, I was 16 years old and me, my two friends and my little brother were living in a brand new neighborhood. My family moved into a model home, and my friends lived in the next model home. There were only maybe 10 houses built in the entire neighborhood, leaving it very dark with limited lighting. But we still had a rather large park at the very end of our street. About a mile or so after the park, there was an elementary school that we would frequently walk to and hop the fence to play some basketball on the court. One night, my brother, my two friends, and I decided to take a walk to this school. It was about 8 p.m. and already dark outside. We played some basketball and trekked back towards the park to go home. There was a very long and dark road from the school to the park with absolutely no houses and no lights, already setting a creepy vibe. When you first hit the park's sidewalk, there sits a metal bench with one street lamp directly above it, shining down. We got to the park's long and curvy sidewalk and stopped dead in our tracks. Here we are, at about 10 p.m. now, staring directly at that bench with the light beaming down on a dark figure. A lady, I presumed, dressed in complete black with a hooded trench coat covering half of her face. She was crouched over, making it seem as she was older. No book, no cell phone, nothing. Just sitting there, motionless. She turned her face to us, but we still couldn't see her with all the shadowing. What happened next freaked us out. She turned back to facing forward and slowly stood up straight, and then started walking sideways towards us. We were still about 15 feet away from her. By this time, we still stood there in complete shock with this eerie feeling consuming us. I remember thinking this shit is pulled straight out of a horror movie. She got about 5 to 7 feet away from us and turned directly toward us with her head still down and her face still covered. We ran. We ran for our dear lives all the way back to my house. Panting, trying to catch our breaths, we couldn't get a word out just yet. I remember having tears in my eyes with just the thought of her movement coming near us. We couldn't figure out why she was there. We finally calmed down and got some sleep. The next day, in the early afternoon, we got together again, and we all walked down to that park to make sure the coast was clear just for kicks, because it was pure daylight and we wouldn't be so frightened anymore, even if the lady was there. You wouldn't believe what was on that same bench as the creepy woman was sitting on. A wild rabbit, a poor rabbit. We live in a desert state, and there are plenty of those hopping around. This rabbit was cut directly in half right down the middle. No blood was leaking from its body at all, as if it had been drained, but there was no decaying, and it was a fresh kill. What was that hooded figure doing there? It's been a decade and I still think of this story sometimes and get chills down my spine and a silly feeling in my stomach. My brother and I still bring this up. What would she have done if she got any closer to us? I'm glad we won't ever know. This is a true story that happened when I was 11 years old. I lived just up the hill, roughly 10 minutes away from my best friend's house. One night, after playing Ding Dong Ditch, I took the trek home up that hill. Then I heard it, rhythmic footsteps in the distance behind me, not quite echoing my own. I glanced back and saw a tall, shadowy figure, carrying what looked to be a hefty wrench. Just a construction worker, I told myself, trying to calm my pounding heart. I sped up. He did the same. At the top of the hill, I glanced back again, panic setting in. His face was twisted with something not quite anger. I broke into a full sprint. The footsteps pounded louder. With a scream, I burst into an alley between two houses, stumbling into a dark window well. Relief should have flooded me, but when I turned to look, the shadowy figure appeared at the top of the hill. He knew where I went, at least I thought so, maybe even where I lived. I sat there in the window well trembling, as the man looked around, beating the wrench across his palm. I sat there for what felt like an hour, before the man moved on with his search. After waiting a few minutes, I snuck out towards the street, searching for any signs of the man. I could see my house in the distance, and decided to make the sprint. My heart was pounding. The man could jump out at any moment and catch me. I got to the door and rushed into my house, locking the door with trembling fingers. For nights after, even my own shadow under a street lamp or the footsteps on pavement would turn my blood to ice. The wrench and its owner were out there, a silent threat always a few steps behind. This is a real story of my experience with something unknown that left me shaking for days. I'm 20 and I'm from a small village in north of Iran up in a mountain area, surrounded with large forest. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18. It was a partly cloudy day, and I was going to go for a walk in the forest like I did every day. And the main path of the forest, it crosses from behind of our house, so it wasn't like a long walk, but it was just deep in the forest. A dirt road with trees around you as far as the eye can see. It was kind of late compared to usual. It was around 5:30 in the afternoon. It was getting dark, but because I was familiar with the path, so I wasn't worried. I was about 20 minutes into the walk, and it just kept getting darker every minute. I get to a part of the path that is straight road like 1,000 feet, and you can somewhat see the end of it. And as I was slowly walking in that road, I see a dark figure at the end of the road, just a shadowy figure standing in the middle of the road, It was like a dusk kind of time, so I wasn't sure what I'm looking at. Especially at that distance, my first thought was that it's probably a cow. It's a village. So many people have farms around here, and sometimes they let their cows in a woods for days. But what surprised me was that it wasn't moving at all. Believe it or not, I don't know why, but I didn't stop. It was the curiosity, maybe. Or maybe I just didn't want to be a pussy if it's a prank or some guy from the village. I don't know really what I was thinking in that moment. I just remember just looking at the thing without a blink as I was walking towards it. The thing that creeped me out the most was why the hell this thing doesn't move an inch. I was just getting more and more scared. As I was getting closer to it, I started to see a shape. It was a tall figure, long and skinny legs. At one point I think I saw a third leg, or maybe a stick in his hands. I don't know exactly. It was so blurry. I kept walking and still not knowing what I'm looking at. My heart was just coming out of my mouth. I stopped at maybe 60 feet of the figure, just looking at it standing still without a single move or anything. I didn't have the courage to say anything. I remember just thinking, fuck it, turned around and walk away. As I was walking back, I constantly looked back at my shoulder, paranoid of seeing that thing move. But every time it was just standing there, and it just kept getting further and further away until it was finally out of sight. It was almost completely dark at this point. After a few turns, I calmed down a little bit. I didn't worry that much. I didn't run home like crazy. Instead, I just kept walking normally and try not to think about what just happened. I just got my phone to maybe call a friend to just talk with them until I get home. And just before that, for the last time I looked back, something I wish I never did, I saw something that traumatized me for life and still makes my hands shake from fear to this day. I saw the same blur black figure, standing still, in the middle of the road, looking at me in like 50 feet. I didn't stand there to see if it moves or not this time. I ran for my life. I ran like if I stopped, I would die. I didn't look behind once. I just ran home. When I got home, my hands and feet was shaking, something that I never experienced and I hoped I would never experience again. My family was worried too. After I told them what just happened, they told me I was hallucinating, but I could tell from their eyes that they are shocked and scared as I was. I never experienced such thing again and never mention it with anyone until today, but this experience will forever be in my mind and haunt me forever. I was around 13 when this happened. I was home alone as my two brothers were out as well as my parents who were out buying groceries. I was playing a video game upstairs when I heard a noise downstairs coming from my brother's room. I took my dog downstairs with me so I wouldn't be alone in case something happens. Just as I was going to open my brother's door, I heard a sound which seemed like clothes falling out off a shelf. I'm not 100% sure. I quickly opened my door and my dog ran in and jumps on my brother's bed. My dog loves smelling, licking and barking at people, so I thought to myself, if there was a person in the room, she would have done so or made it obvious someone was there. I didn't go in, I just stood next to the door because I was too scared. My dog sat on my brother's bed calmly, so I thought nothing of it. I called my dog out of the room, closed the door and went upstairs back to gaming. That's when I heard it. It sounded like a 12-year-old boy said hello, like he was asking if anyone was there, and it was coming from my brother's room again. Couldn't have been my brothers playing a prank or something, as they were not home and were both 16 and 20 at the time, not around 12 years old. I locked my door and sat in the corner of my room till my parents got home. When they got home, I told them what happened. We checked my brother's room and nothing was there. They did not believe me, and my dad even said he used to have dreams that someone was in the house when he was younger. This was not a dream. I was awake. I am sure of it. I don't know who or what it was till this day, but I know it was someone or something.